Cobra, one of Sylvester Stallone's lesser-remembered action films of the 1980s, and for good reason really. Eesh. Even less remembered perhaps is that it actually got a video game adaptation. Well, I guess it's weird world of licensed games time again, so let's go ahead and take a look. The film Cobra has a somewhat interesting history. It starts out when Sylvester Stallone was originally penned to star in Beverly Hills Cop after a number of other stars had joined and left the project. He rewrote the comedy script to be more action-based, including renaming the main character Axel Cobretti. His rewrite apparently didn't excite the filmmakers, who rejected his revisions. Stallone left the project 2 weeks before filming was due to start, as they proceeded to keep the comedy version, and Stallone went on to film Rhinestone instead. 2 years later, Stallone took his version of Beverly Hills Cop and made it into Cobra, mixed in with some inspiration from Paula Gosling's novel A Running Duck, which gets on-screen credit. The film stars Stallone as Marion Cobretti. Get it? Cobra? Cobretti? Ugh. As a renegade cop who is brought in to investigate a series of murders by the Night Slasher. When Ari Knudsen, played by Stallone's then wife Bridget Nielsen, witnesses the Night Slasher and the cult on a killing rampage, she is placed in Cobretti's protective custody, leading to plenty of attempts to kill her, a typical romance between her and Cobretti, all the usual stuff. The film is really a whole lot of nothing. There's nothing that really stands out or gives the plot weight beyond the very standard setup. On a positive note, if you want cheesy lines and a peak 80s soundtrack, then maybe there is something for you.
This is where the law stops, and I start.
There is a whole heap of violence though, as the bodies pile high throughout the film. So much so that it received an X rating, needing cuts to secure an R rating and general release. The film won't offer any surprises. You'll know if it has what you're looking for in a violent action film. Oh, and Pepsi product placement. Everywhere. It nearly makes Pepsi Man look like subtle marketing. So, after the film released to a fair reception at the box office, the video game adaptation was created and published by Ocean Software, who put out a load of movie times in the 80s, and who I still have not forgiven for the Highlander video game. Okay, they only published that one, but there's still blood on their hands. Cobra was released on the holy trinity of 80s gaming consoles. In the name of the Amstrad, the Spectrum and the Commodore 64, thy games be licensed. Interestingly, the games also have a fair bit of difference to them too, rather than being just straight ports. Let's look at the Commodore 64 version first. Okay, so here we are. It's a platformer where we play as Cobra himself and oh, okay, we're dead. Here's the first thing you'll find out about this game. It's hard, ridiculously hard. In these first 10 seconds, you'll need to quickly move across the screen, defeat the enemies that charge at you, and quickly jump onto the dumpsters before a motorcycle rides across the screen and kills you on contact. This is made harder by the clunky controls that quite often make you jump straight up rather than across. Collecting weapons as you go, you have to navigate the levels and its constant onslaught of enemies, bikers, and runaway prams that explode and kill you on contact. Stop throwing babies at me, you psychopaths. Health is displayed by a burger, which gradually dissolves as you take damage. Nowhere in the film does Mr. Cobretti eat a burger, so it's a bit of an odd choice. I mean, why not make it a nice cold can of Pepsi? Hashtag not sponsored. Ammo for your weapons is also represented in the same way, although the throwing knives weapon is unlimited. If you manage to make any progress in the level, you'll come across Irene, who you'll have to escort to the end of the level. She doesn't take damage from anything, so don't worry about blasting her face off or anything. Following the film somewhat, the game's levels reflect the locations in the film, starting in an urban level, moving to a rural setting, and finally a factory to reflect the film's finale. Yes, there are only 3 levels, but owing to the difficulty of the game, that's plenty. When you complete the 3rd level, the game just sends you immediately back to the 1st, looping indefinitely as these games sometimes do. So yes, in short, the game is not great, hampered by unresponsive controls, a lack of variety, and most importantly, a relentless difficulty that stops you from experiencing most of what the game might have to offer. So can the ZX Spectrum version of Cobra offer a better adaptation? Usually in the cases of games which are released on the C64, Spectrum and Amstrad, the Spectrum fares the worst, but we'll keep an open mind on it. Starting it up, we get some pretty good music, a somewhat rarity on the Spectrum. So the game is structured quite differently to the Commodore 64 version. You have the 3 levels, urban, rural and factory, and the same weapons and types of enemies. The objectives in the level are a little different though. Firstly, the levels loop around indefinitely, so you can move freely left and right throughout the level. When doing so, you have to find the 4 hamburgers placed throughout the levels, and collecting them will award you with one of the weapons: knives, pistol, machine gun, and invincibility pill. Why are all these things hidden in hamburgers? When you collect a weapon, you have unlimited ammo, but only for a short time, as indicated by an image of a duck dissolving. Again, why a duck? Surely a can of Pepsi would be more appropriate. Hashtag not sponsored. Nearly anything would have been more appropriate than a duck. Also, if you're hit when holding a weapon, you'll immediately lose it, so it also acts as a shield or something. Get hit without a weapon though, and you'll immediately lose a life. There's no life meter in this version. Without a weapon, you'll be headbutting enemies, which causes them to fly off screen when hit, which is pretty fun. Your next objective is to find Irene, who will follow you around when you find her. Unlike the Commodore 64 version though, if she is hit, she'll run off screen and disappear, meaning you'll have to find her again. Finally, you'll have to defeat all of the enemies that have spawned in the level, and with all of those objectives completed, you can finally move on to the next, eventually completing the 3 levels, and again starting from the first, looping indefinitely. When you eventually run out of lives, you'll get a game under. What? What does that even mean? And also, high score table is labelled as the morgue. Okay, that one's a bit funny. Overall, I think this is actually a better game than the Commodore 64 version. It's still difficult, but at least it doesn't throw everything at you at the start so you die in the first 10 seconds. As such, it's kind of fun to play, but the difficulty still remains. Also, the baby prams do make a return, but they only stun you if they hit you, which leaves you open to attack from other enemies. You can get extra lives every 10,000 points fairly quickly to make up for it, but there's still a lot going on across the screen at any one time to make this quite a challenge. Finally, can the Amstrad CPC version rescue this game from licensed hell? This version is a little different from the other two, but still similar enough. You'll be walking around infinitely looping levels, much like the ZX Spectrum version, as you attempt to kill all the enemies until you move on to the next level, which is nearly identical. Yeah, the big difference in this version is that it doesn't have the 3 levels of the other two. Every level is just an urban setting with a slightly different colour tone. There are other differences, as new enemies are introduced as you progress, such as the machine gun enemy, and eventually you'll have to find and protect Irene, who can actually die and thus cause you to lose a life. This is made harder when another new enemy appears a few levels later, who will walk toward Irene and punch her to death. The enemies in this version require more concrete tactics to deal with than the others. Enemies do not damage you if you touch them, so you must focus on dodging their weapons. You can dodge the bazooka guys by ducking their missiles, knife guys by jumping, and a new enemy, ducks. Yes, damn ducks flying around and into you like so many other flying enemies in games. The solution to these enemies is to simply jump into them. That seems to work quite nicely. No hamburgers this time either. You'll have to get your weapons from punching out windows like a delinquent. Overall, I would say this is the easiest game to complete of the 3. The enemies don't constantly overwhelm you and have specific counters. You don't die in one hit, but there's no health meter, so you have no idea how many hits you can take before dying. Again, lives are somewhat easy to come by every 10,000 points, with each enemy giving you about 600. The main problem is that the game is so long, and with so many levels that barely look any different, if you do manage to make it towards the end, you get an ending screen that makes it seem like the game is more surprised than you that you actually made it through this. And there you have it, all 3 versions of Cobra based on the film. Licensed games of the time are poison. This is not the cure. Like so many licensed games of the time, it fails to offer anything new or even just be a good game in its own right. The game is short, repetitive, badly controlled, and way too difficult to get anything out of it. If I were to pick the best version to play, I would probably go for the Spectrum version. It's difficult, sure, but has nice music, fast-paced, and the game doesn't try and kill you outright straight from the beginning, giving you at least a chance to play the game. The Amstrad version is probably the easiest, but its lack of variation in the levels, and there's way too many of them. The C64 version looks the nicest, but as I say, is way too brutal to be any fun, and doesn't give you a fair chance to play it. So that's it for Cobra, but there's much more to explore in the weird world of licensed games. So join me next time for another adventure through the greatest of licensed cash-ins.